The gunfire had stopped 3 hours ago, but Beatrice Sinclair could still smell the smoke clinging to her dress as she stood in the doorway of what used to be her family's mercantile. Aurora, Colorado had become a graveyard in a single afternoon, and she was the only living soul left on Main Street to witness it. The Dalton gang had ridden through like a plague of locusts, taking her father's life, her mother's jewelry, every coin from the register, and the hope she had carried in her heart since childhood. Now, at 23 years old, she owned nothing but the calico dress on her back and the grief that threatened to swallow her whole. She stepped over the broken glass scattered across the threshold, her boots crunching against the shards. The shelves her father had built with his own hands stood empty, ransacked of fabric bolts, tinned goods, and everything else that had made this place feel like home. Blood stained the floorboards where he had fallen, and Beatrice forced herself to look away. The undertaker had already taken his body, along with the 7 other men who had tried to stand against the outlaws. Her mother had died 2 winters ago from pneumonia, and now Beatrice truly had no one. The September sun hung low over the Rocky Mountains, casting long shadows through the shattered front window. She heard the sound of boots on the wooden sidewalk and turned, half expecting another wave of violence. Instead, she saw a tall man with broad shoulders and a weathered face beneath the brim of his brown Stetson. He wore a duster coat despite the mild weather, and a silver star glinted on his vest. "Madam, you should not be in here," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "This is still a crime scene." Beatrice lifted her chin, trying to summon dignity from the emptiness inside her. "This is my store, was my store. I have every right to be here." The lawman stepped carefully through the doorway, his gray eyes taking in the destruction with a practiced assessment. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a jaw shadowed with stubble. "Name's Clayton Chandler, Deputy Marshal out of Denver. I rode in as soon as we got word about the Dalton gang hitting Aurora. I'm sorry I did not arrive sooner." Would it have mattered? Beatrice heard the bitterness in her own voice and did not care. They took everything. They killed my father for defending what was ours, and they rode away laughing. Clayton removed his hat, holding it against his chest in a gesture of respect. "I tracked them for 2 days before they hit here. They are moving fast, hitting small towns between Denver and the Kansas border. I sent word ahead to the next settlements, warned them to prepare. Preparations did not help us." Beatrice gestured at the empty shelves, the broken furniture, the bloodstain that would never fully wash away. "The sheriff tried to organize the men. They shot him first." "I know. I saw his body." Clayton's expression darkened. "The Dalton gang has been terrorizing this territory for 6 months. Every time we get close, they slip away, but they are getting sloppy, leaving more evidence. I will catch them. And that will bring my father back. That will restore what they stole." Beatrice felt her composure cracking, tears burning behind her eyes. "I have nothing left. No family, no livelihood, no future. What am I supposed to do now?" Clayton studied her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his eyes, recognition of shared pain, perhaps, or understanding of what it meant to lose everything. "You are stronger than you think, madam. I can see it in how you are standing here, facing this, instead of hiding away. You do not know anything about me." But even as she spoke the words, Beatrice felt something crack open inside her chest. She had been holding herself together through sheer will since the shooting stopped, but this stranger's unexpected kindness threatened to break through her defenses. "Maybe not," Clayton admitted. "But I know what it looks like when someone has been through hell and is still standing. I have seen that look in the mirror often enough." Before Beatrice could respond, a woman's voice called from outside. Miss Sinclair. Oh, thank heavens you are alive. Mrs. Patterson, who owned the boarding house at the edge of town, hurried up the sidewalk with her skirts swishing. She was a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour perpetually dusting her apron. I have been so worried. When I heard about your father, I feared the worst. You must come stay with me. You cannot remain here alone. Beatrice wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her independence even in the face of disaster, but the truth was that she had nowhere else to go. The living quarters above the store had been ransacked as thoroughly as the shop itself. I cannot afford to pay you. Nonsense. You will help me in the kitchen and with the guests. Consider it a fair trade. Mrs. Patterson took Beatrice's arm with maternal firmness. Come now, I have stew on the stove and a clean room ready. Clayton settled his hat back on his head. That is a good plan, Miss Sinclair. You should not be alone tonight. I will be staying at the boarding house myself while I investigate. If you remember anything about the men who did this, anything at all, please tell me. Beatrice let Mrs. Patterson guide her away from the ruins of her former life, but she glanced back at the marshal. He stood in the doorway of the mercantile, a solitary figure silhouetted against the dying light, and she wondered what losses had put that haunted look in his eyes. The boarding house was a 2-story white structure with green shutters and a wide front porch. Mrs. Patterson led Beatrice upstairs to a small but clean room overlooking the street. A quilt covered the narrow bed, and lace curtains filtered the evening light. It was simple and homey, and Beatrice felt her throat tighten with gratitude. Rest a bit before supper, Mrs. Patterson said gently. I will bring you some hot water for washing. Alone at last, Beatrice sank onto the bed and let the tears come. She cried for her father, for the life she had known, for the future she had imagined that would never happen now. She cried until her chest ached and her eyes burned, until there was nothing left inside her but hollow exhaustion. A knock on the door roused her sometime later. Night had fallen, and lamplight glowed through the crack beneath the door. Beatrice wiped her face and opened it to find Mrs. Patterson with a pitcher of steaming water and fresh towels. Supper is ready when you are, dear. Take your time. Beatrice washed her face and hands, trying to make herself presentable. She changed out of her smoke-stained dress into the only other one she owned, a simple blue cotton that she had been wearing when she fled the store during the attack. When she came downstairs, she found a long dining table set with mismatched plates and bowls of hearty beef stew. 3 other boarders were already seated, along with Clayton Chandler. He stood when she entered, a gesture of courtesy that seemed natural to him. Miss Sinclair. She took the empty chair across from him, acutely aware of his gaze. Mrs. Patterson bustled in with a basket of bread and began serving the meal. The other boarders were a traveling salesman, an elderly prospector, and a young schoolteacher who had arrived just before the raid. They ate in relative silence, the trauma of the day weighing on everyone. Deputy Marshal, do you really think you can catch those men? The schoolteacher asked. Her name was Miss Weber, and she looked barely older than 18 with frightened rabbit eyes. I do, Clayton said with quiet confidence. They are heading east and they are burdened with stolen goods now. That will slow them down. I am riding out at first light to pick up their trail. And what about us? The prospector demanded. His name was Gus, and he had lost his entire stake in the raid. Who will protect this town if they come back? They will not come back, Clayton assured him. The Dalton gang never hits the same place twice. They rely on surprise and speed. But I will send word to the territorial governor to assign a new sheriff to Aurora as soon as possible. Beatrice pushed stew around her bowl, her appetite gone. She felt Clayton's eyes on her and looked up to meet his gaze. You said you tracked them before they came here. How did you know they would hit Aurora? Pattern, he explained. They have been working their way along the mining routes, targeting towns with banks or successful merchants. Your father's store had a reputation for fair prices and good inventory. That made it a target. So we were doomed from the start. The bitterness flooded back into Beatrice's voice. No matter what we did, they were coming for us. You could not have known. That is not your fault. Clayton leaned forward, his expression earnest. The guilt belongs to the men who pulled the triggers, no one else. After supper, Beatrice helped Mrs. Patterson clear the table and wash the dishes. The simple domestic tasks helped ground her, gave her something to focus on besides the grief. When they finished, she stepped out onto the back porch for some air. The September night was cool, and stars filled the sky above the dark silhouettes of the mountains. She heard the door open behind her and knew without looking that it was Clayton. He moved to stand beside her at the railing, giving her space but offering his presence. I lost my family too, he said quietly. 5 years ago, Comancheros raided our ranch in West Texas, killed my parents and my younger brother. I was away buying cattle, and by the time I got back, everything was burning. Beatrice turned to look at him, seeing him truly for the first time. The grief in his eyes matched her own. I am sorry. I joined the Marshals because I could not save my own family, but maybe I could save someone else's. I have spent 5 years chasing outlaws across 3 territories, and every time I catch one, I think maybe it will ease the anger inside me. It never does. He gripped the railing, his knuckles white. But I keep trying because I do not know what else to do. At least you have a purpose, Beatrice said. At least you are doing something that matters. I have nothing. I do not even know who I am anymore without the store, without my father. Clayton turned to face her fully. You are Beatrice Sinclair. You are the woman who stood in the ruins of her life today and did not break. You are stronger than any outlaw because you are still here, still fighting, even if you do not realize it yet. His words stirred something in the hollow place inside her chest. I do not feel strong. I feel empty. That is what strength looks like sometimes, just surviving when everything in you wants to give up. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his intention, and placed his hand over hers on the railing. His palm was warm and calloused, solid and real. You are not alone, Beatrice. I know it feels that way right now, but you are not. She should have pulled away. She barely knew this man. But the simple human contact, the warmth of his hand on hers, was the first comfort she had felt since the world fell apart. She let herself take it, just for a moment. Will you really catch them? She asked. I swear it on my family's graves. The conviction in his voice was absolute. They will pay for what they have done. They stood together in the darkness, 2 wounded souls finding unexpected solace in shared understanding. When the cold finally drove them inside, Beatrice felt fractionally less alone than she had that morning. Clayton left at dawn as promised, but before he rode out, he stopped by the boarding house. Beatrice was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Patterson prepare breakfast when he appeared in the doorway, his saddlebags packed and his rifle secured to his horse. I will be back, he told Beatrice. However long it takes, I will be back. She wanted to ask why he was telling her this, why it mattered, but the answer was already forming in her heart. In the space of one evening, this stranger had become important to her in a way she could not fully explain. Be careful. He touched the brim of his hat in farewell, and then he was gone, riding east toward the rising sun. The days that followed were the hardest of Beatrice's life. She threw herself into work at the boarding house, scrubbing floors and washing linens until her hands were raw. She helped Mrs. Patterson cook meals and tend the small garden behind the house. She did anything to keep her mind occupied, because when she stopped moving, the grief rushed back in. The town of Aurora slowly began to recover. Neighbors helped neighbors repair damaged buildings. The bank reopened with guards posted outside. The territorial governor sent a temporary sheriff, a gruff man in his 50s who set about organizing town defenses. But the mercantile remained closed, its broken windows boarded over, a reminder of what had been lost. Beatrice could not bring herself to go inside again. Instead, she found herself walking past it every evening, staring at the building that had been her whole world. Mrs. Patterson never commented on these walks, just had hot tea waiting when Beatrice returned. 2 weeks after Clayton left, Beatrice received her first letter. Mrs. Patterson brought it to her with a knowing smile. The envelope was worn from travel, and Beatrice recognized Clayton's bold handwriting from the wanted posters she had seen him studying. She opened it with trembling fingers. "Miss Sinclair, I have tracked the Dalton gang to a hideout near the Kansas border. With the help of local law and several other marshals, we raided their camp yesterday. 3 of the gang were killed in the fight, and 4 more were taken into custody. The leader, Jake Dalton, was among those captured. He and his men will stand trial in Denver for their crimes. I wanted you to know that we recovered some of the stolen property. The money from your father's register is gone, spent on whiskey and cards, but we found several items of your mother's jewelry among Dalton's possessions. I have secured them and will return them to you personally. The trial will take some weeks to organize, as we must gather witnesses from all the towns they hit. I must stay in Denver to testify and help the prosecutor build his case. But I think of Aurora often. I think of you often, if I am being honest. Your strength in the face of such loss has stayed with me. I hope you are finding some peace. Yours, Clayton Chandler." Beatrice read the letter 3 times, her heart beating faster with each pass. He had caught them. Her father's killers would face justice, and he thought of her. She sat down at the small writing desk in her room and composed a reply. "Deputy Marshal Chandler, thank you for bringing the Dalton gang to justice. Knowing they will pay for their crimes brings me some comfort, though it cannot restore what was lost. I am grateful you recovered my mother's jewelry. Those pieces are all I have left of her now. Life continues here in Aurora. I have been helping Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house and trying to decide what to do with my future. The mercantile stands empty. I cannot afford to restock it, and I am not certain I have the heart to try. Everything has changed, but you were right about one thing. I am still standing. Some days that feels like victory enough. Your words that first night meant more to me than you may realize. It helps to know someone understands. I hope the trial goes well. Aurora will be glad to hear that justice was served. Sincerely, Beatrice Sinclair." She posted the letter the next morning, and in the weeks that followed, more letters came. Clayton wrote to her about the trial proceedings, about life in Denver, about his work as a marshal. His letters were honest and thoughtful, revealing a man who carried deep wounds but refused to let them define him. Beatrice found herself watching for the mail coach with increasing anticipation. She wrote back about Aurora's recovery, about the new sheriff's efforts to make the town safer, about her work at the boarding house. She told him things she had not shared with anyone else, about her fears and her grief, about the strange emptiness of being the last of her family. Writing to Clayton felt like talking to someone who truly understood. October came, bringing cold nights and golden aspens in the mountains. One afternoon, as Beatrice was hanging laundry in the backyard, Mrs. Patterson called from the house. "Beatrice, do you have a visitor?" Her heart jumped, though she tried to tell herself it could be anyone. But when she came around to the front of the house, brushing dirt from her apron, she saw Clayton Chandler standing by the gate with his horse. He looked leaner than she remembered, harder somehow, as though the trial had taken something from him. but his face lit up when he saw her, and suddenly the month apart felt like both a day and a lifetime. "Hello, Beatrice." Clayton. His name felt natural on her lips, as though she had been saying it for years rather than weeks. "I did not know you were coming. The trial ended yesterday. All 4 of the surviving gang members were convicted. They will hang next week." He said it matter-of-factly, but she heard the grim satisfaction underneath. "I wanted to come back, to see how you were doing, and to return your mother's jewelry." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small leather pouch. Beatrice took it with shaking hands and opened it to find her mother's silver locket, the garnet earrings that had been her grandmother's, and the simple gold band her father had given her mother on their wedding day. Tears blurred her vision. Thank you so much." "I wish I could have recovered more." Clayton's voice was rough with emotion. "You deserved better than this." Beatrice clutched the pouch to her chest and looked up at him. "You gave me justice. You gave me closure. That is more than I dared hope for, Mrs." Patterson appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Deputy Marshal Chandler, you must stay for supper. I insist, and I have a room available if you need lodging." Clayton accepted with gratitude, and as he settled his horse in the small stable, Beatrice realized how much she had missed him. His letters had been wonderful, but having him here in person, seeing his quiet strength and steady presence, made her feel more grounded than she had in weeks. That evening after supper, they walked together through town. Aurora was quieter now, more cautious, but life continued. The saloon was still open, the church bell still rang on Sundays, and families still gathered on porches in the cooling evening air. "Have you decided what to do about the mercantile?" Clayton asked as they passed the boarded-up building. "I cannot keep it," Beatrice admitted. "I have no money to restock it, and even if I did, I am not sure I could work there without seeing my father's blood on the floor. The bank holds the mortgage. I have been trying to arrange a sale, but no one wants to buy a store that was the site of a massacre. What will you do instead? I do not know. Mrs. Patterson has offered me permanent employment at the boarding house. It would be honest work, and I would have a roof over my head, but it feels like giving up on everything my parents built." They reached the edge of town, where the road stretched east into the gathering darkness. Clayton stopped and turned to face her. "Can I tell you something I have learned in 5 years of chasing outlaws? Of course. Sometimes starting over is not giving up. Sometimes it is the bravest thing you can do. Your parents built a good life, but that life ended. Now you have to build a new one. There is no shame in that." Beatrice studied his face in the twilight. "Is that what you did? Built a new life after you lost your family?" "I tried. The Marshals gave me purpose, but it is a lonely life. Always moving, always chasing the next criminal, never putting down roots." He hesitated, and she saw vulnerability in his eyes that had not been there before. "I have been thinking maybe it is time for something different, something more." "What do you mean?" "I mean that in the past month, writing to you, thinking about Aurora, I realized I am tired of running. Tired of letting grief drive me from place to place. I want to belong somewhere again, to someone." Beatrice's breath caught. "Clayton, I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other, but I feel something when I am with you, Beatrice, like I can finally breathe again. Like the anger inside me is not the only thing I have left." He took her hands in his touch gentle but certain. "I am not saying we have to rush into anything. I just wanted you to know that I am interested in you, in the possibility of us." For the first time since the raid, Beatrice felt something other than grief and emptiness. She felt hope, tentative and fragile but real. "I feel it too. I thought I was imagining it or that it was just gratitude because you helped me, but when you left I missed you. And when your letters came, they were the best part of my day. Clayton smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "So we are agreed. We can see where this goes." "Yes." Beatrice squeezed his hands. "Yes, I would like that very much." They walked back to the boarding house in comfortable silence, their shoulders occasionally brushing, the connection between them growing stronger with each step. At the front gate, Clayton lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a courtly gesture that made her heart flutter. "Good night, Beatrice." "Good night, Clayton." She watched him disappear inside, then stood in the garden for a long moment, pressing her hand to her chest where something warm and bright was beginning to bloom. Clayton stayed in Aurora for a week, and Beatrice treasured every moment. They took long walks in the foothills, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on a cattle ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about his dreams of expanding his family's land before the raid destroyed everything. She told him about her childhood in Aurora, about helping her father in the store, about her mother's gentle wisdom and her father's terrible jokes. They discovered shared interests, a love of the mountains, a fondness for apple pie, a belief that people were fundamentally good despite evidence to the contrary. They also discovered differences that made their conversations interesting. Clayton was methodical and patient, while Beatrice tended toward impulsive decisions. He was quiet and contained. She was expressive and quick to laugh, but the attraction between them was undeniable. Every accidental touch sent sparks through Beatrice's nerves. Every smile Clayton gave her felt like a gift. When they sat together on Mrs. Patterson's porch in the evening, watching the sun set behind the mountains, Beatrice felt more content than she had thought possible. On Clayton's last night before he had to return to Denver, they walked to the edge of town where the prairie grass stretched away toward Kansas. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air smelled of coming winter. "I do not want to leave," Clayton said quietly. "But I have responsibilities in Denver, cases I need to close, reports to file. It will take a few weeks." "I understand, you have a job to do," but Beatrice could not hide the disappointment in her voice. "Come with me." She turned to stare at him. "What? Come to Denver?" "Not forever, just for a visit. See the city, meet some people I know. There are opportunities there, Beatrice. You could start fresh, build a new life. Or you could decide you prefer Aurora and come back, but at least you would know what options you have." "Clayton, I cannot just leave. I have work at the boarding house, and Mrs. Patterson will understand. She cares about you and wants you to be happy." He took her hands, his gray eyes intense in the starlight. "I am not trying to pressure you. If you want to stay here, I will respect that. But I think you are too talented, too smart, to spend the rest of your life changing sheets in a boarding house. You deserve more." Beatrice's mind raced. Denver was a real city with thousands of people and genuine opportunities. She could find work there, maybe even start her own business eventually, and she would be close to Clayton, could continue exploring whatever was growing between them. But Aurora was home, the only home she had ever known. Leaving felt like abandoning her parents' memory. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I will write from Denver either way." Clayton pulled her closer, and Beatrice went willingly, letting him wrap his arms around her. She rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart, and felt safer than she had in months. After Clayton left the next morning, Beatrice wrestled with her decision. She talked to Mrs. Patterson, who encouraged her to go. "This is your chance at happiness, dear. Your parents would want that for you." She talked to the new sheriff, who assured her that Aurora was recovering well. She even visited her father's grave at the edge of the cemetery and sat there for an hour, trying to feel some guidance from beyond. In the end, it was standing in front of the boarded-up mercantile that made her decide. The building was a tomb, a memorial to everything she had lost. She could stay in Aurora and let the past define her, or she could take a chance on the future. She chose the future. 3 days later, Beatrice boarded the stage to Denver with a single trunk containing all her worldly possessions. Mrs. Patterson cried and hugged her tightly. "Write to me and come back to visit. You will always have a home here." The journey took 2 days, and Beatrice spent them watching the landscape change from mountain valleys to rolling plains and back to mountains again. Denver sat at the base of the Rockies, a growing city of brick buildings and busy streets. The stage pulled into the depot on a cold November morning, and Beatrice climbed down with her trunk, suddenly nervous. She had sent Clayton a telegram telling him when she would arrive, but she did not see him in the crowd. Panic fluttered in her chest. What if he had changed his mind? What if this was a terrible mistake? Then she heard his voice. "Beatrice." He pushed through the crowd, his face bright with joy, and suddenly everything felt right again. He took her hands and looked at her like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. "You came." "I came." She smiled up at him. "Now what?" "Now I show you that there is still something beautiful in this world. Come on." He collected her trunk and led her to a buggy. As they drove through Denver's streets, he pointed out landmarks: the Capitol building under construction, the grand hotels, the bustling markets. He took her to a modest but respectable boarding house run by a friend of his, a widow named Mrs. Chen, who had rooms available for single women. Over the next weeks, Clayton showed Beatrice Denver. They visited museums and attended concerts. They walked through city parks and ate at restaurants Beatrice had only dreamed about in Aurora. He introduced her to his friends among the Marshalls and their families, and she found herself welcomed into a community of good people. But more importantly, they spent time together. Long evenings talking over coffee, afternoons exploring the mountains outside the city, quiet moments sitting side by side, content in each other's company. The connection between them deepened into something real and lasting. One December evening, Clayton took Beatrice to a restaurant overlooking the city. Snow had fallen that afternoon, turning Denver into a winter wonderland. They sat by a window, watching the streets below fill with holiday shoppers. "I have something to tell you," Clayton said, his expression serious. Beatrice's heart sank. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Actually, something is very right." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I have been offered a promotion. Chief Marshal for the Colorado Territory, based here in Denver. It is mostly administrative work, training new marshals and coordinating investigations. No more long pursuits across 3 territories." "Clayton, that is wonderful. You deserve it. It means I would be staying in Denver permanently." Putting down roots. He turned her hand over, tracing patterns on her palm. "I have also been looking at property. There is a house for sale on the west side of town, near the mountains. It has good land, enough for some horses, maybe even a family someday." Beatrice's breath caught. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying I love you, Beatrice Sinclair. I fell in love with you that first night in Aurora when you stood in the ruins of your life and refused to break. I fell deeper in love with you through our letters and our walks, and every moment we have spent together since. You make me want to be more than just a lawman chasing ghosts. You make me want to build a real life." Tears filled Beatrice's eyes, but they were good tears, joyful tears. "I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you when you told me I was stronger than I knew. You gave me hope when I had nothing left." Clayton stood and moved to kneel beside her chair, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Marry me, Beatrice. Let me show you every day that even when they take everything, there is always something left. There is always love. There is always hope." There is always us. Yes. The word came out as barely more than a whisper, but it carried all the conviction in her heart. Yes, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger and Beatrice pulled him up so she could kiss him. It was their first real kiss and it felt like coming home. They married 2 weeks later in a small church in Denver. Mrs. Patterson made the journey from Aurora to attend, along with the temporary sheriff and several other friends from Beatrice's old life. Clayton's fellow marshals filled the groom's side of the church, and Mrs. Chen and several of Beatrice's new Denver friends sat with Mrs. Patterson. Beatrice wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and she carried a bouquet of winter roses. Clayton wore his best suit with his marshal's badge pinned to his vest. When the preacher asked them to exchange vows, they spoke words of love and commitment that came straight from their hearts. "I promise to stand by you through every hardship," Clayton said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise to build a life with you that honors what we have lost while celebrating what we have found." "I promise to love you with everything I have left," Beatrice replied. "I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your home for as long as we both live." When they kissed as husband and wife, the small congregation erupted in applause. Beatrice felt her father's absence acutely, but she also felt his blessing. He would have liked Clayton, she thought. He would have approved of this match. The reception was held at a hotel downtown, with food and music and dancing. Beatrice danced with Clayton until her feet hurt, then danced some more. She danced with the marshals and with Mrs. Patterson, and even with the gruff temporary sheriff from Aurora, who admitted he had doubted she would survive her grief. "You proved me wrong," he said. "You are tougher than most men I know." As the evening wound down, Clayton and Beatrice left the hotel and drove to their new home. Clayton had purchased the house he mentioned, a 2-story frame structure with a wide porch and a barn out back. He carried Beatrice over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down in the front hall. "Welcome home, Mrs. Chandler. It sounds strange having a new name, but I like it." Beatrice looked around at the empty rooms waiting to be filled with furniture and memories. "I like it very much." They spent their wedding night making love and making plans. Clayton told her about his vision for the property, the horses he wanted to raise, the garden they could plant in the spring. Beatrice told him about her dream of eventually opening a small shop in Denver, not a mercantile like her father's, but perhaps a dress shop or a bakery. Something that was hers alone. "Whatever you want to do, I will support you," Clayton promised, pulling her close in their new bed. "We are partners in this life. Your dreams matter just as much as mine." As Beatrice drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she thought about how far she had come since that terrible day in Aurora. The Dalton gang had taken everything from her: her father, her home, her security, her sense of safety in the world. They had left her with nothing but grief and emptiness. But Clayton had shown her that even nothing could be transformed into something. He had shown her that love could grow in the ruins of tragedy. He had shown her that strength was not about never falling, but about standing back up. Winter turned to spring, and the Chandlers settled into married life. Clayton excelled in his new position, training young marshals and coordinating law enforcement across Colorado. He came home every evening to Beatrice, and they spent their nights talking and laughing and building the intimacy that made a marriage strong. Beatrice started a small business making dresses for Denver's growing population of women. She had learned sewing from her mother and had a good eye for fashion. Word spread about her skill, and soon she had more orders than she could handle. She hired 2 young women as assistants and rented a small shop on a busy street. The shop bore her new name, Chandler's Fine Dresses. But inside, she hung her mother's locket as a reminder of where she came from and what she had survived. In June, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She told Clayton over dinner, watching his face transform with wonder and joy. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Happy does not begin to cover it. He came around the table and knelt beside her chair, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. I am your father, and I already love you more than I thought possible." Beatrice ran her fingers through his hair, her heart overflowing. This child would never know the grandparents they had lost, but they would be loved fiercely by the parents they had. They would grow up in a home filled with laughter and security, knowing that even when the world tried to break you, love could heal the cracks. Their son was born in February of 1876, a healthy baby boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Clayton's younger brother, and William, after Beatrice's father. Tommy, as they called him, was an easy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world from his mother's or father's arms. Watching Clayton with their son made Beatrice fall in love with her husband all over again. He was gentle and patient, singing lullabies in a surprisingly good voice and walking the floor for hours when Tommy was fussy. He was the father his own father had been, carrying on a legacy of love despite the violence that had tried to end it. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter. Sarah Beatrice Chandler had her mother's quick smile and her father's serious demeanor. She was more demanding than her brother had been, making her opinions known from birth, and both parents adored her for it. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Clayton's career continued to flourish, and he was eventually appointed U.S. Marshal for Colorado, one of the highest law enforcement positions in the territory. Beatrice's dress shop expanded to 3 locations across Denver, and she employed a dozen seamstresses. They bought more land around their house and raised horses that Clayton trained in his spare time. But more than professional success, they built a family. Sunday dinners with friends and colleagues, picnics in the mountains during summer, sledding in winter. Tommy grew into a thoughtful, quiet boy who loved books and horses. Sarah was vibrant and outgoing, always organizing neighborhood children into elaborate games. Beatrice never forgot Aurora or the tragedy that had sent her to Denver. She visited her father's grave once a year, bringing flowers and telling him about his grandchildren. She maintained correspondence with Mrs. Patterson, who eventually sold the boarding house and moved to California to live with her sister. The mercantile building in Aurora was eventually torn down and replaced with a new general store. The town recovered and grew, becoming a prosperous mining community. But for Beatrice, Aurora would always be the place where her old life ended and her new one began. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Clayton surprised Beatrice with a trip back to Aurora. They left the children with Mrs. Chen and took the train to the mountains. Aurora had changed significantly in the decade since the raid. New buildings lined Main Street, and the population had tripled. They walked through town hand in hand, and Beatrice showed Clayton where the mercantile had stood. There was a bakery there now, filling the air with the smell of fresh bread. "Do you regret leaving?" Clayton asked. Beatrice considered the question carefully. "I regret what I lost. I will always miss my father and wish he could have met our children. But I do not regret leaving. If I had stayed, I would have been stuck in grief, trying to rebuild something that could never be the same. Coming to Denver, marrying you, building our life together, that was the right choice." "You saved me too, you know," Clayton said. "I was drowning in anger and vengeance before I met you. Chasing outlaws was all I had. You gave me a reason to stop running, to put down roots and build something permanent. You reminded me what I was fighting for." They visited the cemetery before leaving Aurora. Beatrice placed flowers on her father's grave and introduced him to Clayton, telling him about the life they had built. "I think he would be proud of you," Clayton said as they walked back to the train station. "I know I am." Years passed. Tommy went to college and became a lawyer, following in his father's footsteps of pursuing justice, but through the courts rather than a badge. Sarah shocked everyone by becoming a doctor, one of the first women admitted to medical school in Colorado. She was as fierce and determined as her mother, refusing to let society's expectations limit her dreams. Clayton eventually retired from the Marshals and devoted himself full-time to the horse ranch. He and Beatrice would sit on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the mountains, talking about their children and their grandchildren and the life they had built from nothing. "You remember that first night in Aurora?" Beatrice asked one summer evening. They were in their 60s now, their hair gray and their faces lined with the marks of a well-lived life. "When you told me I was stronger than I knew." "I remember everything about that night," Clayton said. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even covered in soot and grief. I remember wanting to fix everything for you and knowing I could not. I remember hoping I would see you again. You did fix everything, in a way. Not by catching the men who hurt me, though that mattered. You fixed everything by showing me that life could still be good, that I could still be happy, that love was still possible." Beatrice took his hand, the same hand that had comforted her in her darkest moment. "They took everything from me that day in Aurora, but you gave me so much more in return." "We gave each other a second chance," Clayton said. "That is what love does. It takes the broken pieces and makes something new and beautiful." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, two people who had survived tragedy and found each other in the aftermath. Their children were grown and happy. Their grandchildren were healthy and loved. The ranch was prosperous, and the horses in the pasture whinnied softly in the gathering darkness. Beatrice thought about the terrified young woman she had been, standing in the ruins of her father's store with nothing left but grief. She thought about Clayton appearing like a guardian angel, offering understanding and hope when she needed it most. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, to this porch, to this life, to this moment of perfect peace. They had both lost everything once. But they had found each other, and in doing so, they had discovered that even the deepest loss could not erase the possibility of joy. Even the darkest tragedy could not prevent new love from blooming. Even when everything was taken, something precious always remained. That something was hope. It was resilience. It was the courage to stand back up and try again. It was the willingness to open your heart even after it had been shattered. Most of all, it was love. The kind of love that heals wounds and builds futures. The kind of love that transforms grief into gratitude and fear into faith. The kind of love that two broken people create together when they refuse to let tragedy have the final word. Clayton and Beatrice Chandler lived out their remaining years in peace and contentment, surrounded by family and filled with the satisfaction of lives well lived. When they finally passed, many years later and within days of each other, they were buried side by side in Denver's cemetery with a headstone that read, "In love, we found what could not be taken." Their children and grandchildren gathered at the gravesite, mourning their loss but celebrating their legacy. Tommy spoke of his father's dedication to justice and his mother's fierce determination. Sarah talked about the example they had set, showing that strength came in many forms and that love was the greatest power of all. As the family left the cemetery, a young couple remained behind. They were newly married, still learning to navigate the challenges of life together. They stood before the Chandler headstone, and the young woman said, "My grandmother told me about them, how they met after a tragedy and built this beautiful life together. It gives me hope." Her husband squeezed her hand. "That is a good story to remember. That even when things seem impossible, love can make them possible again." They walked away hand in hand, carrying the story forward, and in that moment, Clayton and Beatrice's legacy continued. Not in grand monuments or history books, but in the hearts of people who remembered that they had taken everything until nothing was left, and the cowboy had shown her something was still left. He had shown her love. He had shown her hope. He had shown her that endings could become beginnings, and that two wounded souls could heal each other if they were brave enough to try.